way you don't make too much noise when you shut it
Oh,
down, because it mic does pick up.
well now, hey, says I'm live. So we have a few people in the live chat already. We have Crypto Alchemist. We have Nick of Time, Shadow 611, Ting Ting Shiny, Cole Brady, Darcy Edmonds, B Nickel, Kevin O'Brien, and Brian Evans. Old Gaffer's here, and I guess I'm using my FM voice. I guess I should look at the camera, right? You guys can hear me good, right? Give me an audio check from the live chat. Live chat works. Give me a sound check in the live chat. Can you guys hear me? Testing. Okay, good. Thank you, B Nickel. Thank you. Well, today I'm very excited. We have our good friend Dr. Joseph Farrell, and we're gonna discuss, I think, what is some interesting stuff back on our trans-temporal cosmic milieu of topics. Yeah, I hope you're getting the idea. You're you know getting the concept that this is almost, I don't want to say unified theory, but you know how people are always looking for a unified theory, whether they should or not, whether it applies or not. But it may not be a unified theory, but this trans-temporal cosmic technology can do multiple things that are extraordinary. Okay. So I'm here with a little bit of energy with our friend Cardinal Sin there on the mug. A toast to Cardinal Sin. And remember, here's my time travel novel. You can get it at walterbosley.com. You don't want to miss this. And without further ado, I'm going to bring in our friend. Uh-oh. Okay, there, he's back. He's back. So I'm going to bring in our friend Joseph Farrell. Joseph Farrell, how are you today, sir?
Having internet connectivity problems, believe it, just as we get started, of course, naturally. Yes. It's odd because Dark Journalist has been having connectivity issues. I've been having connectivity issues, and now that someone is screwing with the internet. And anyway, I'm fine. How are you?
Good. You know what? We're talking about things people don't want us to talk about.
True.
I'm not going to go into it here, but I had what I'm pretty sure is one of those incidents in the last few days. Mm-hmm. Somebody, they don't want you talking about certain things, and they let it be known. They find a way, and trying to mess with the ability to get out to the audience, to the public, is one of those ways. But today, I was thinking about it for a few days there. As the title of the show says, Trans-Temporal Cosmic Communication, it got me to thinking, my first question to you would be, I have two questions to start this off. My first question would be, what do you think about the idea that any kind of what we would call radio communication through our technology, our communications technology, if we've received any kind of messages, would it be possible to receive it again, trans-temporal, across space and time? I mean, what do you think about the idea that for instance, the WOW signal, the legendary WOW signal, in your mind, what would the implications of the possibilities? What would you think about if that was coming from the future or the past?
Well, first of all communication takes place in time. What you're suggesting is that there is a significant transference of information uh, that sort of skips around time, from 100 years in the future to now, just like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, Walter, about 20 to 30 minutes before I got your link for the show, someone emailed me a scientific paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to read, I haven't read
Oh,
this yet,
do it.
but I want to read you the title of this paper. And then I'll read the abstract. The abstract's only about, I think, a paragraph or so long.
Mm-hmm.
But the abstract itself is interesting reading because basically, I haven't read the paper, but basically from the sound of the abstract, is somebody out there is already thinking about this stuff and has reached certain very interesting conclusions. So here we go. This is, incidentally, this is from the National Library of Medicine that this paper was found and forwarded
Okay.
to me. The paper is published and dated September 15th, 2021, so just a couple of years ago. And I want you to listen to the title of this thing. Temporal teleportation with pseudo-density operators. Subtitle, How Dynamics. Now, please understand, when they use the term dynamics here, folks, what they're talking about is basically everything. In other words, how all physical systems emerges from temporal entanglement. Okay? Now, if that's not enough, here's the abstract quote. We show that by using temporal quantum correlations as expressed by pseudo-density operators, it is possible to recover formally the standard quantum dynamical evolution as a sequence of teleportations in time. We demonstrate that any completely positive evolution can be formally reconstructed by teleportation with different temporally correlated states. This provides a different interpretation of maximally correlated pseudo-density operators as resources to induce quantum time evolution. Furthermore, we note that the possibility of this protocol stems from the strict formal correspondence between spatial and temporal entanglement in quantum theory. We proceed to demonstrate experimentally this correspondence by showing a multipartite violation of generalized temporal and spatial Bell inequalities. By the way, the Bell inequalities, John Stuart Bell was the physicist that came up with the idea of non-locality. Okay, so this is what the general area they're talking about there. Spatial Bell inequalities, and verifying agreement with theoretical predictions to a high degree of accuracy in high-quality photon qubits. And that's the abstract. Now, that's a whopper, folks.
And and this is coming from a medical perspective journal.
Yeah.
Okay. You know what comes to my mind? Here's what I think someone's trying to do there. Here's what they're trying to do, but with the human body.
Right.
You know how but here's what they're trying to do. You know how when your computer gets an issue, whether it's a virus, let's say a virus, and you go in there under safe mode and you bring it back to a point prior to where the virus hit, to where the computer was healthy.
Right.
This is what they're trying to do with the human system, using to maybe link back to the part in your body before you got the disease.
It goes further, Walter, much further, because if you look at certain papers in quantum biophysics, they have already been and I've been saying something similar to this for years, but they've been saying essentially that for life to occur at all, there has to be a basis of life in quantum entanglement. In other words, what holds organisms together is the phenomenon of non-locality and quantum tunneling. That's what holds everything together. So there's a biophysics basis to all of this that's becoming more and more apparent. But I just thought that paper, would be right up your alley, given today.
That's
And like I say, I haven't read the paper, but when I read the abstract, I just thought, holy crap!
I mean, my gosh, think about um, uh, 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 surgery
Yes,
could be something that is eliminated. The need for surgery, because or it could make surgery even more precise when surgery has to be done. Bring that much more precision. But you could, I mean, we're getting closer every day to the diagnostic bed on the
right,
Starship Enterprise.
right.
I mean, this is, you know,
Yeah.
that's something, and that's a
Well,
serious source.
a diagnostic bed like that would have to be reading the quantum signatures of your body and doing
mhm.
so on a kind of a cell by cell basis. And again, the signatures that they're probably reading are all going to be harmonic in nature. So
Yeah.
we're constantly going back to the few basic concepts, but I think the idea of electrodynamics emerging from
Mhm.
a chain of entangled quantum temporal states is, is rather breathtaking,
Yeah, yeah.
to put it mildly.
It makes you wonder what kind of stuff has been going on in labs that have brought them to that language in a paper.
Bingo. And for
Yeah.
here's where you raise, Walter, such a hugely important point. I really hope people were paying attention to what you just said, because what you just said is that this paper is out there, and they let it out there, and it has such gallopingly obvious national security implications that
Yep.
to let it out there is, to me, an indicator that where they're actually at is much
Yes.
further down the road
Yep.
than
Yep.
this abstract. So,
That rule of thumb always
yeah,
applies. Just
yeah,
like with aircraft, we know
yeah,
that if they say this aircraft has a ceiling of such and such and this
right.
capability and this reach, you can always expect it to be higher,
That's
farther,
right.
faster
Yeah,
than what they're telling you.
yeah,
They've always, and that applies to the aircraft they're telling you about. You can
right.
also assume that there's one you don't know about
Sure.
that's way beyond that. And
Right.
so that language tells me that there's been some serious breakthroughs in this.
Probably. Yeah. Given everything else that I've seen in the last 10 to 15 years in terms of physics papers, the acoustic metamaterials that resemble miniature singularities, that to me I thought was too out there way back when I wrote the Giza Death Star series, and now they're talking about it openly.
Yeah.
The idea that we have uh, all of this stuff concerning invisibility that's coming out now, all on and on we could go. um I'm no longer ready to write off anything anymore, given what I've seen.
Right.
It's,
Right. Well,
uh,
okay, on the issue of the communication
okay.
aspect of this. Um, remember a few years back when there was talk of these clay cylinders that had been found that allegedly, when they put a phonograph or whatever needle to it, that they claimed that the sounds from 400 years ago or whatever it was
Yes.
had been embedded in these cylinders. And
Yes.
then we don't hear any more about that.
Right.
And whenever something disappears like that, just like the whole thing about during the 50s, there were open source articles on anti-gravity tech, and then by
Right.
1958 it suddenly disappears. There's a lid on it.
Right.
You know, I'm wondering if they've done something like that with some type of you know, we're always talking about some type of technology, but you know, I wonder if they've been able to capture audio of the past off of objects that were there at that time, or
I
sent
strongly
to us.
suspect that they have,
Mm-hmm.
because just on a simple analog basis, all you would
Mm-hmm.
require would be something with a semi-permeable surface
Mm-hmm.
that was capable of recording subtle sound vibrations, and then it undergoes a phase transition and solidifies, and you've captured, just like a record player, a vinyl record player. You've got that. And there was, if you recall, Walter, there was a movie with Eric Roberts about this idea, but applied in a psychic sense, called
Mm-hmm.
Sensation,
Okay.
where he is a professor trying to recover uh, a murder that occurred through sound recordings in the ordinary objects in some lady's apartment. So the
Okay.
idea that
Okay.
the idea, it's not a well-known movie. It's actually one of his better movies. But I think the idea that you're talking about probably is something that, again, uh, an agency like the Diabolically Apocalyptic Research Projects Agency, or as we also like to call it, DARPA, um, would be something right up their alley, because they're
Sure.
constantly looking for scientific ways to fulfill occult lore. We've got the idea of psychometric objects,
Mm-hmm.
even crystals
Yeah.
picking up subtle impressions of the people around them.
It
Well,
makes you rethink
yeah,
actual ancient relics and stuff too that
yes.
seem to be, oh, was this just decorative, or maybe they're
Oh no.
recordings? You know.
Yeah. I have no problem with the idea of psychometric objects, or with the idea that crystals pick up the subtle biological imprints of the people that own them or are constantly in proximity with them. And the reason why is, again, that we as organisms, our very DNA is an aperiodic crystal. And crystals are always and constantly being grown in response to their environment. So at a
Mm-hmm.
certain point, it begins to make sense why you have all of these doctrines and so on in esoteric lore, because what they're really talking about ultimately is a kind of physics. So yeah, I don't have any problem with it. What the problem you and I would have with it would be more what sort of technology would you develop
Yeah.
to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting here that out there in your state of Nuttyfornia, which I certainly hope falls into the sea soon, and 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 spares all of my friends out there.
Cowabunga.
Yeah, that you guys pull the lot at that Sodom and Gomorrah routine. But anyway, no, I'm joking here, folks. I certainly don't hope California falls into the sea. I wish Sacramento would, but anyway.
Certain, I was just going to say certain select
Yeah,
areas,
certain
yes.
select areas, get rid of those. But anyway, um, out there in California at the University of California in San Diego, I think it was, or Davis,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere down there. Uh, there was a very famous professor, Dr. William Tiller,
Yes.
who was the professor emeritus of materials science. And for those of you listening that are unfamiliar with Professor Tiller, he wrote a series of 3 books about experiments that he did while he was a professor there. And quite literally, they are experiments in group intentionality. And can group intentionality alone demonstrably affect a physical system without any physical connection to it. And what he did is he had 4 people agree on a written out, please hear me now, on a written out intention that they meditated about, and they were trying to put that intention into a box. Okay. And the intention was that in the vicinity of this box, a fruit fly's gestation period would change, and that the pH acidity level in water would change within a certain predictable degree that was statistically significant. So in other words, he spelled out, all the necessary conditions. Well, lo and behold, the fruit fly's gestation periods did change, and so did the pH levels in the water when placed in the vicinity or environment of this box. So there you have it. Is this thing picking up some sort of very subtle vibration simply from the brain wave? What's going on here? We don't know.
Well, that's very key in successful remote viewing as well, is the written down intention. That's where it all starts.
Yeah. Well, folks, this is why they're in such a hurry to change and update the liturgies of the church. What do you have in those old liturgies? You have written out intentions that are centuries old. And they are group intentions. So, this is an old thing that we're talking about, and Tiller is kind of taking it a step further. Anyway, go ahead, Walter. I didn't
what you just said, though, is a form of the term that comes to my mind is, and this is with the little s and a little m, S&M, sympathetic magic. Sympathetic magic is really what you're talking about, affecting the field,
right?
Through wow.
Well, I did a webinar on my website, Walter, about Dr. Tiller and about this research that he did. He recently passed away, incidentally, folks. But one of the things I point out in the webinar is that what Dr. Tiller is really telling you is the same thing that medieval theologians were talking about when they wrote about sacraments. A sacrament has to have proper form, proper matter, and proper intention. That's the doctrine. Okay. The intention is what is spelled out in the prayers that you're saying or reciting when you're performing the sacrament.
This
in other words,
to me, this is the part of theology that to me is the important part, is when you describe what it is these things actually do effectively.
Yeah, that's what it's doing. It's exactly the same thing that Tiller is doing in his research. What's he talking about? He's talking about proper form, proper matter, proper intention. So I do think that, these ideas are very old. They're not new.
Right.
What they're telling us, I think, is that at some point there was a long lost science or a long lost religion or a long lost philosophy behind it all. Because again, the ancient mind didn't make those nice, neat, modern, segmented, compartmental boxes between those 3 things. So I think, there's something going on here, and we're just now getting back into this, and I hope people pick up on this. We have become obsessed in modern science with the effects of consciousness on physical systems, and vice versa. There's a feedback loop. But none of this would have made any sense, Walter, to a 19th century Victorian physicist. None of it.
Right.
It really took quantum mechanics to bring this consciousness business back into.
And you're talking Maxwell versus Einstein.
I'm talking, not even Maxwell versus Einstein so much. I'm talking I'm talking Max Planck versus Isaac Newton.
Ah, yes. Okay.
That
Yeah.
would be a better way to put it.
Better example. Yeah.
Yeah, because both Maxwell and Einstein are, you can make a case, particularly with Maxwell, believe it or not, are definitely observer based. But it really doesn't, it doesn't snatch on to physics like a barnacle until Max Planck and even more importantly Werner Heisenberg with the uncertainty principle, that you cannot measure the position and momentum of an electron at the same time. Well, that means that prior to setting up an experiment, you are determining the outcome depending on what it is you're looking to measure. So the results of the experiment are to a certain extent not even physical. they're a result of your free will.
Okay.
So it's
Wow.
Yeah, that's a wow. That's what so disturbed modern physicists at the beginning of the 20th century, particularly after Heisenberg announced the uncertainty principle, because it was immediately apparent what the total logical philosophical end result of what he had just said was. So here we are, and what I'm trying to get at is we're just at the beginning.
Right.
We're just at the beginning of something that you and I, Walter, we've talked about this for years and years and years. You and I have talked about the idea that the ancients had some sort of very sophisticated, very advanced knowledge of all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Case in point, astrology. Well, you read the Babylonian or Egyptian records on astrology, and they both tell you that, okay, we're getting all of this stuff because we were taking observations over thousands of years. Well, right there, they've just told you that it's a statistical science. And we're nowhere close to it.
Right. Yeah. Ours hasn't been going for thousands of years yet.
No, exactly.
This brings to mind the things you talk about. You and Scott DeHart talk about in Grid of the Gods, for example, and you talk about it in other books where the whether it be a temple, a pyramid, or a church, even in the medieval era, how these imply a lost technology, and how they could communicate. It's a facsimile of some type of communication stations between the churches, the cathedrals, the temples, what have you. And I find that really fascinating. I always have.
Well, the idea is not mine. It's coming out of a German physicist engineer by the name of Dr. Konstantin Meil. I wrote about his ideas in Babylon's Banksters.
Yes,
but he had the idea, and I think he's correct, by the way. And he's another one of these nutty guys that looks at things and like Chris Dunn, and looks at things with an engineer's eye and says, "Oh, this is a radio optical cavity."
Yeah,
because he was looking at ancient temples, and particularly the Pantheon in Rome.
Yes.
And concluding, oh, this has all the characteristics of a radio cavity.
I mean, you've been there, right? The Pantheon. Right?
No, I have not been to the Pantheon.
Oh, I have, and it's now that we're talking about
creepy.
the dome one with the hole in the top and all the square.
Yes.
Yeah, I swear, it's like looking the first time at Puma Punku when you're there. I walk into the Pantheon, and I'm like, this is not something from what we would think from ancient Rome, as amazing as they were engineering wise. You stand in there and you're like, this is just so what we would call modern.
Yeah.
That what the heck was this?
What were they doing?
And Mile thinks it was radio optic.
He thinks it was a radio resonant cavity, and moreover points out the resemblance of the Pantheon to a British magnetron that they would use in their radar sets. So in other words, the whole thing is designed like a great big analog magnetron. So, which is interesting to me. And once you get to that point, I took off from that in some of my private notebooks. I had, I play the pipe organ. I've been transfixed with the instrument ever since I was a boy.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is, if you look at the typical cruciform shape of a Western cathedral or big church
Yeah.
or what have you,
Mm-hmm.
what you're looking at is a three-dimensional analog of a tesseract. And a tesseract is a four-dimensional hypercube.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Yes, indeed.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Now, now
Okay.
what? Now what are we doing with these gigantic instruments that can quite literally are so loud and powerful enough that they can shake that whole building
Yeah.
and the ground outside it or the ground that it's on? Well, you're doing, in my opinion, you're doing a heck of a lot more than just making people have goosebumps, because
Yeah.
that's the physical effect of playing those instruments. You're also modulating information into the earth.
Oh,
So in
right.
other
Okay.
words, you could use that building to send simple telegraphic signals by simple radio telegraphy.
Mm-hmm.
And Mile points out that, okay, maybe this explains why you have those curious statements in the Roman classical authors, Juvenal, Cicero, all these people, Seneca, who say things like, General so and so sent to the emperor for instruction and received his reply the next day. Okay, well, General so and so happens to be over in the Crimean Peninsula, and of course, and the emperor is in Rome. Okay, and I'm sorry, but the Roman semaphore fire system didn't work that quickly,
Yeah,
nor
and
efficient.
and runners aren't
And
fast
runners
enough.
aren't fast enough to do that. Yeah, so
Wow.
what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's entirely possible that these people know a heck of a lot more than they've let on, throughout history. There's something else going on. And it makes, Miles' solution to this, Walter, is really brilliant. Because if they're using simple radio telegraphy to communicate, in other words, Morse code, pulses,
Sure.
you need a membrane that's sensitive enough to pick up those pulses.
Okay.
Entrails.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We're the priests. We know how to read these entrails, and the oracle says, So it becomes reading the entrails. In other words, reading the pulses in the membrane.
Yeah. Yeah, they're the
it,
techs.
yeah,
They're the techs, the
they're the
technicians.
techs, right? They're the techs. It's the trade secret.
They're the guy. If you're, go watch one of them World War II movies or any submarine warfare movie. They're the guy
Bingo.
sitting there in front of the screen,
Yeah.
and the captain's always saying, "What do you got? What do you got?" Hey, sir, this, that, and the other.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what's going on.
So this leads me to a thought that I had that I mentioned about something. If they, there's always the they. If they in ancient times were doing that with the temples and stuff, let's bring it up into our modern context. As you know, I have mentioned, because it's going on more than 25 years ago, that one of those things I heard tell when I was in the Air Force is that in the southwestern United States, there is a huge phase conjugate mirror.
Oh, yes.
And that this is what I was told, not in a briefing, so I'm not breaking any laws here. As far as I know, if someone knocks on my door and calls me by the first name that I haven't
we'll
heard
know what happened
Captain,
to you, Walter.
Yeah, Captain, we need to speak to you. Oh, shit. Anyway, I was told that some of the images, those amazing images that were credited to Hubble, were actually captured by this phase conjugate mirror on the ground. Now, here's what I'm wondering. Could this thing actually also be a communications device, I wonder?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Okay, let's
across
back up. Let's
whatever.
back up and explain to people what Walter's talking about. A phase
Mhm.
conjugate mirror
Mhm.
is what began to be talked about and developed in this country during the Reagan era in response to his Star Wars program. And it, as far as I'm concerned, I think the Soviets were onto this way ahead of us in terms of because I write about the Soviet radar experiments on nonlinear materials after World War II
Mhm.
being based on captured Nazi radar scientists that the Soviets acquired. And the Nazis discovered, in my opinion, and Tom Bearden has written about this, and he's the one I'm getting it from. Tom Bearden mentions that phase conjugation was something the Nazis discovered during the war with their radar experiments. So, what is phase conjugation? Phase conjugation, to make a very simple illustration of it, would be in order to make a laser weapon work in the atmosphere, you have to account for the dispersion of the beam
Mhm.
due to the atmosphere.
Mhm.
So, what phase conjugation does is it takes, so to speak, a picture of the atmosphere. It shines a beam through the atmosphere, takes a picture of the distortion,
Mhm.
and then does a 180-degree out of phase flip of that distortion, so that when you send a beam through the distorted picture
Mhm.
that's out of phase. In other words, you're conjugating the phase of the waves going through the atmosphere. You're simply reverse phasing them. That allows the beam to retain its coherence over a much greater distance.
Right.
Okay, that's phase conjugation, oversimplified and in a nutshell. Now, the telescope that I think you were probably hearing about was an optical phase conjugate mirror at
Yes.
Kirkland Air Force Base in
Yes, it was.
Albuquerque. Okay, that's
I was being vague. Indeed, it is.
okay. Well,
Kirtland Air Force Base.
sorry to let that cat out of the bag, guys, but
Oops.
oops, it's a little too late now. But anyway, um, the telescope at Kirkland
Mhm.
was the very earliest phase conjugate mirrors that this government, I'm not even getting to the Soviets yet, that
Mhm.
this government ran
Mhm.
were permeable solid membranes of a mirrored surface on little springs.
Yes. Yep.
And the springs would adjust the
Yep.
surface of the mirror just
Yep.
slightly enough in response to this atmospheric picture so that beams of light would be reflected back through it without the normal distortions caused by the atmosphere. And all this was being run by computer. Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that was kind of the Mark One phase conjugate mirror.
Mhm.
And there are famous pictures of lasers being shot through this columnized phase conjugate mirror from Kirkland Air Force Base. And it was in connection with what's his name in the UFO case that your friend Greg Bishop wrote a book about.
Oh, Paul
Uh,
Benowitz. And
Paul
by the way,
Benowitz, yes.
I was told the one I was told about had a diameter of a mile.
Okay, that would make sense to me. And if that's the case, then it sounds to me like what they've done is they've turned the very large array into a phase conjugate mirror. That's what it sounds like to me. Now, the interesting thing about the Mark II versions of these phase conjugate mirrors,
Mhm.
the Mark II versions do not require the analog hard surface. The mirror itself becomes an optical cavity that is made out of nonlinear materials which reflects the waves. And the nonlinear materials, folks, are things like plasmas Or in the case of the World War II German radar experiments, what the Germans discovered was they embedded little tiny spheres of metal in rubber, and the tiny spheres of metal were resonant to the frequencies of Allied radar. So all Allied radar sets and their known frequencies were resonant to these little balls that the Germans were impressing in rubber. And then they would take that rubber and coat the snorkels on their U-boats with this rubberized stuff so that the snorkels would not return a radar signal to Allied radar sets in ships and airplanes. And the U-boat was virtually undetectable.
But could it pick up Allied signals?
Oh yes, absolutely. And
this is like an early primitive Tempest, the Tempest technology that reads vibrations on glass.
This is the earliest radar stealth technology.
Wow.
It's the early Nazi equivalent to electrochromatic paint. Okay.
Oh,
the interesting, well, there's another one for you folks. But the interesting thing is the Germans, being Germans, they test everything to death. What they decided to do was test this material by wave mixing a bunch of radar waves at different frequency on the same material at the same time. And what they got in response was this material with the rubber. The metallic spheres are the linear material, but the rubber is the nonlinear matrix in which the linear material is embedded. Does that sound like quartz crystals and granite, folks? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Ding, ding, ding.
Aha.
The light bulb just goes off. And what the Germans got by doing this was the wave that was beamed on the material was phase conjugated, and that means cohered, and reflected back on their radar sets and blew their radar sets out.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And this was an experiment supposedly that was done in March of 1945, right towards the end of the war, and the Soviets scooped up all these radar guys. So yeah, there's an aspect of phase conjugation, in other words, that involves nonlinear materials as the cavity, as the medium, which takes this phase conjugate picture, and that's the point I'm trying to get at. And lo and behold, the two best nonlinear materials that we know of are rock, things like granite, limestone, that have a linear material embedded in the matrix, or plasma.
Okay.
Ding, ding, ding.
Now, on the rocket part, on the granite part, we're talking about earlier about sound being embedded in the clay cylinders and the surfaces of other things. So
precisely.
I could see, a team of, Office of Naval Research guys going to the Yucatan and aiming their devices at the old pyramids, and actually picking up the audio of a ritual done 500 years prior.
Ding, ding, ding.
And there we had Sylvanus Morley and the ONI crawling all over. They were archaeologists.
Yeah. Ding, ding, ding. Ding, ding,
wow.
Ding. There's a reason they've been doing this stuff, folks, and it has nothing to do with the kind of physics that we learned in junior high school.
Well, now I want to go back and look, for example, as I mentioned, Sylvanus Morley. I want to go back and look close at the teams of agents and people that were out there, and maybe look at their specialties and see if we can get a clue that they had figured this out and were pre-World War II, of course. But then I want to see if there was any change in what archaeologists were doing in these places after March of 1945, after the end of the war, when, and particularly Russian archaeologists after they captured what you just said at the end of the war. Wow.
It's not very well known. You can go online and find this stuff if you are very patient and persistent with the search. But the Soviet Union did precisely what you are talking about.
Okay.
In fact, what Stalin did, this is something that Bearden has written about, and he's done this in connection with his writing about phase conjugate mirrors. What Stalin did, according to Bearden, was that he told the Soviet Academy of Sciences to go out and scour every Western scientific journal that they could and pull out anything that hinted at the possibility of being able to do an end run around American post-war nuclear superiority.
Okay.
In other words, what Stalin was telling the Soviet Academy of Sciences to do was look for the anomalous that could be turned into a strategic weapons advantage in terms of weapons technology. And they did this, according to Bearden. And in particular, they pulled out, and Bearden talks about these three papers a great deal in his writings, and I have accordingly done the same. There are two papers by the American physicist Barus, Barus, but much more importantly, there is a paper by the British physicist E.T. Whittaker that was published in 1905, same year as special relativity, in the German journal Mathematische Annalen. And that paper is called On the Partial Differential Equations of Mathematical Physics. And folks, all I can tell you is, even if you're not mathematically inclined, go read the paper, particularly its ending. Because Whittaker, by the way, Whittaker's not a slouch. He was a well-known, world-respected mathematical physicist. It's just that Einstein, writing with special relativity later that year, kind of stole the thunder. But the real thunder is Whittaker's paper, because in it, he argues the case mathematically and concludes that gravity is a harmonic phenomenon and subject to harmonic analysis. And, all you need, that's all you need right there to understand the significance of Whittaker's work.
Yeah, and when you look at geomorphology with the telluric perspective, that doesn't surprise you at all.
No, it doesn't, because again, crystals are what? They're grown in response to the gravitational electromagnetic environment in which they're grown. But here's the other half of what the Soviets did, and this is the part that you can go find online. Apparently, at the same time that Stalin was, basically applying the whip to the Soviet Academy of Sciences, go out and find something brilliant, they were sponsoring, just as the Nazis had done, a lot of archaeological expeditions around the world. Mm-hmm. And they were doing so in the very same general areas that the Nazis did. So I think what has happened, Walter, is that the Soviets managed somehow to get their hands on some of the archives of the Ahnenerbe and decided that, this was worth pursuing, and started to go out and pursue it. I think it's very likely that at some later time, probably the late 50s, early 60s, the Soviets had come to the conclusion that these things that they were pursuing as more or less separate tracks were somehow connected.
Okay.
And I'm thinking in particular of the work of Nikolai Kozyrev and his experiments with torsion waves and so on. Because again, I wrote about Dr. Kozyrev. The thing I think really brought this home to the Russians was when Khrushchev lit off the Tsar Bomba, that 57 megaton monster hydrogen bomb.
Yeah.
I think the Soviets were surprised themselves by the yields that they got out of that thing, and that Kozyrev was brought in to explain it. And I think that was the beginning for them of, hey, these things are gating energy from something else, and we better dang well find out what it is.
What came to my mind a couple of moments ago involves, it's just kind of jumping tracks. That's the way my head works. You have written about and discussed, we're going in a context of what somebody expects is on its way to our world, the NASA and whoever, what they know is on the moon and Mars. And you've referred to them as the cousins who may be returning. Okay. Now, here's something that that just came to mind. I doubt I'm the first to think about this, but I wonder if somebody out there who they think is on their way back to our world. What we would say is back, because maybe they've been here before.
Okay.
How do we know that what they're picking up, let's say it's a signal. Let's say, for hypothetical, that the reason they believe this is they picked up a signal. What if actually that signal was sent long ago and it was the signal of when they were on their way here the first time? And we're just now picking it up because, that's how some people have pointed out, and I think there's something to this. We go out there, we look at the stars. Half of those stars could actually no longer exist now in our present time, and we're just seeing the light reach us. I wonder if it's the same for, possibly signals that are popped up.
Well, if the signals that you're talking about are standard electromagnetic signals, yeah.
Yes.
Because there's that velocity of light speed limit, but the problem is that the velocity of light in terms of the scale of the universe is like trying to rely on the Pony Express for modern day communications.
Yeah.
It's just antiquated. It's slow. The kind of signals that I think any civilization like that is going to use are going to be signals within the medium itself. In other words, they're going to be longitudinal pulses in the medium. Why? Because a longitudinal pulse is going to travel much faster than an electromagnetic Hertz wave. Again.
So would we receive this, say, at the poles? Would the poles be a good place to set up the receiver?
Possibly, yes. You're gonna the resonator in that case has got to be the entire planet. We're talking
wait a
with
minute.
the Tesla system.
Okay. Hold on. We've heard stories about Antarctica.
Yes.
We've all heard stories. I heard them in the mid 90s about a giant hole. Okay. And all this stuff. Go back to what you said about the phase conjugate and a resonant plasma surface. What if at Antarctica, what they found is some type of ancient receiver in this hole? They put a plasma surface or figured out how to turn this on. And what they're receiving, what the big secret of Antarctica is that there's a receiver down there, an ancient receiver.
It's the planet. I'll tell you why. And I'm not saying you're not onto something. I'm just gonna put a curveball on it.
Okay.
You recall the stories about Admiral Byrd and all the people that think that Admiral Byrd found a hole at the pole and
Right.
discovered that the Earth was hollow, and that's really what they're keeping secret.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah, we've all heard that. Yeah.
we've all heard that. Now, what if there was some truth to it? Let's just take the hole at face value. And by the way, folks, please don't go off the deep end here. I am
Right.
not saying that there's an actual hole there, but let's say there was. Okay,
For conversation's sake.
for conversation's sake. Well, what does that make planet Earth? If the planet Earth is hollow and it has a hole at one end of it, that makes the entire planet a gigantic Helmholtz resonator.
A gigantic pantheon, or as
Let me put it again. A gigantic Helmholtz resonator, such as Chris Dunn
yes.
posited in the Giza power plant book. Okay.
Oh my God. I never thought about that when I was in Rome, standing inside that structure. That
It's got a hole in it.
I'm looking at a model
Yes.
of the hollow Earth from the
looking
inside.
You're looking at a Helmholtz resonator. Why is the hole? Because what happens when you blow sound across a hole? Play the flute, play the clarinet, play a pipe organ. You get a sound.
Yeah, which is a signal.
Which is a signal. You get a frequency. All right.
Oh, this is good stuff.
All right. So if you're talking about a hole at the end of the planet, you've got a gigantic Helmholtz resonator. In other words, it's an acoustic cavity. Now, let's fill in the hole. Okay. Let's fill in the cavity. But let's make what we fill the cavity with of a completely different density than the outer crust of the planet. You still have a resonator. Okay. It's the medium and density of the materials, and the density will change the quality, but not the basic principle.
Right.
Okay. So in other words, could they have discovered something that indicates that the planet itself was being used or utilized as a gigantic resonant cavity to longitudinal pulses in the medium? Answer, yes. What do those pulses do? Well, they're certainly reliant on what we've already been talking about, and that's entanglement. This stuff is all connected. And by the way, do I think, for those who might be thinking this in your listening audience, do I think there's a possibility that big neutrino detector that they have in the ice down there has something to do with all of this? Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
What would the effect of another smaller Helmholtz resonator, say in orbit of the planet that's a Helmholtz resonator, but what possible effect could that have on the functionality of that planetary Helmholtz resonator?
It would have an enormous effect. It would have an enormous effect.
Which might explain why somebody parked it there in orbit.
Which might explain why somebody parked it there in orbit. Yeah. What you're doing is you're doing what? You're wave mixing. You're modulating information into the local structure of space-time. And therefore it's always going to you're literally playing the solar system like a gigantic pipe organ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With space and time.
With space and time. The music of the spheres.
Indeed.
Oh,
wow. So what goes through my mind is, what and whom have we, if not directly communicated, what have we picked up that has actually been recorded in these mediums that when we sent that ping to the moon that time in the early
Mhm.
60s.
Mhm.
We heard that, oh, yeah, it rang like a bell, and then they quit talking about that. I wonder if they actually tuned in and listened to any recordings that have been embedded on the moon. For all we know, let's, for fun, for conversation's sake, that the moon is a gigantic craft, arc, thing that moved through space and was parked here.
Okay.
The civilization that did that could have left a recording of who they are, who they were, where they were from, when they arrived.
Uh-huh.
All of that could
Uh-huh.
have been embedded in the granite, so to speak, the crystals or whatever of the moon itself.
Right.
And that could be, just one of those secrets that they keep from us regarding the moon. That could be, I don't know. I wonder now, of the little things they set up on the moon, what could they have set up that would have maybe clarified the signal?
Well, let's talk about electroacoustic sonar.
Okay.
Okay. Because that's what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about the ability to pick up subtle modulation of
Mm-hmm.
of a longitudinal pulse in the medium. In other words, modulation I'm using here in the term of putting information on the radio wave. So you've got your carrier wave on the radio, and then you've got the information that's modulated into the radio signal that your radio receiver deconfigures and puts out through the speaker that you understand as a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the modulated information in your longitudinal waves might possibly be what they picked up on and why they're not talking about. Why? All you need to understand is that sound as a longitudinal pulse tends not to decompose or lose coherence in a medium nearly as fast as an electromagnetic wave. This is why you can hear things underwater for miles.
Whale
The
songs come to
whale
mind.
songs, submarines being crushed.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the USS Thresher.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have listening stations underwater for a reason, folks, because we can hear hundreds of miles away. Missing airliners from Indonesia that supposedly crash in the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Where are the recordings?
Yeah.
So, in other words, during World War II, what were submarine crews told to do if they're underwater and they've got a British or a Japanese destroyer pinging sonar at them trying to find them? Be very quiet. Don't talk. Don't drop a screwdriver. Just shut up and be very quiet. Because the moment you hear a sound, they can target that sound. They know exactly where you are, exactly what depth, and how far away you are. So, could the moon be doing that? Yeah. Could pinging the moon have produced an echo that they did not expect to get? In other words, pinging the moon, was it really an echo reflection at all, or did that echo carry modulated information on it? And if it carried modulated information, yeah, you betcha, Walter, they're going to clamp down on that.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And another question that comes to mind on this, when we're talking about people from other worlds, you have to, what language would they speak in? Would it be mathematics? Would it be something that they would feel like could be translated? Or, that's the
Okay.
question. How would you even know that it's there's ways to know you're hearing a language without understanding the language.
Right. There are, and every language that we know of, I suspect that the initial attempts to communicate would be mathematical, yes. But let's take a case in point. How do how do signals intelligence people decrypt and decode encrypted messages, whether it's in Japanese or Russian, English, German, Swahili, what have you? Well, the easiest type of code is a simple substitution cipher. Okay. Those can be cracked rather easily, they discovered around the turn of the century, because within every language, certain letters take statistical prominence. In the English language, the frequency table of letters is ETOANRISH, and on it goes. So, in other words, the most frequent letter in the English language is E. So you simply take the
Sure.
number of occurrences of symbols and decrypt it that way. You simply crunch the statistics. That's all you have to do. In more complicated codes, you have the occurrence of certain words or certain phrases, and on we go. So I would suspect, Walter, that if you're communicating with some other entity that's not human, that is nonetheless using a language, the first thing that your people would tell you is, yes, you're listening to a language, simply given the types of pattern that we're seeing in the statistics.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it would be very easy for them to do. Interestingly enough, there are claims out there that the National Security Agency did receive information like that at some point and has been attempting to decode it. I don't know how true they are. They've been around for about 20 to 30 years. So take that in conjunction with what you said earlier about the wow signal and so on. It's been around for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. This is all just, it can be mind blowing, but
it is.
What it can do is it gives you a different perspective on things that you just didn't think in terms like that. Now, for instance, maybe now, think about it. Ground radio was, the U.S. Navy was very fond of ground-based radio, which is basically, stick your technology literally into the ground, like Nikola Tesla type stuff. So apply those concepts, give that to Morley and his O&I agents, let them run all over the Yucatan and stick this stuff on these computers. What in the hell were they picking up, I wonder? I
have to wonder too, and I think you're onto something there. Because the parameters that you're suggesting of what they're doing indicates that they had some sort of prior knowledge and that they were testing something.
Yeah.
So I would guess that at some level with those experiments and those expeditions, you not only got O&I involved, but that you have, you have agencies like DARPA, that you have defense contractors like SAIC that do all this very bizarre, strange, you betcha. I don't think there's anything normal about what these people have been doing. I mean, heck, go back to Dr. Farouk El-Baz.
Yes.
And his cosmic ray experiments at Giza. Trying to find more internal structure in those two big pyramids. Why on earth would he think that cosmic rays were a more viable method of doing that than standard radar tomography or particle rays or what have you? Well, there are certain reasons, but what I'm getting at is that he thought out things in terms of the most viable and wild science that he could possibly apply to his experiment. And this is what I think you're dealing with Morley.
Staying on the theme of the Yucatan and ancient Mexico, for example, I'm wondering, we all know from a magical perspective, dark magic, black magic. Now I wonder what influence and when I say influence, I mean actual physical, material, or whatever you want to call it, influence, that human emotion, specifically human terror
Mm-hmm.
and shock,
Mm-hmm.
would have on a signal or what have you, a use of a pyramid in the way that we're discussing.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me wonder, the Aztecs and their sacrifices,
Mm-hmm.
did they understand what we're talking about to some extent with these pyramids? And could the human sacrifice have played some type of sympathetic magic
Mm-hmm.
role in all this, using these temples, as a technology,
Mm-hmm.
more than just shedding the blood for some,
No, I think
unseen
so. I
god.
absolutely think so. I do. I absolutely think so. Um, for many years, and George Ann Hughes and I used to talk about this very same idea many years ago on her programs on the Bite Show.
Mm-hmm.
I think quite literally that the intention of any sacrificial system, especially human sacrifice,
Mm-hmm.
is to shock the medium.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Um, However, the problem ultimately is, and this is where I think there was massive miscalculation. The medium, in the sense that it might represent God, cannot be shocked.
Okay.
Insofar as the medium represents a component of creation, it can be. And there's the difference. So, in other words, since we're drawing analogies, I think there is a logic to sacrifice that becomes particularly apparent when you read the Vedic cosmological version of it.
Mm-hmm.
In the Vedic version, you have the idea that the cosmos itself arose out of a sacrifice. And later on in the development of the Brahmanic tradition, the idea of sacrifice then becomes a literal sacrifice that is used to gain the power or the control of the power of creation, which is to a certain extent a misreading of the original Vedic idea of sacrifice. And what do I mean by this? Well, let's draw a simple analogy to parents with their child.
Mm-hmm.
The very idea of having a child is to a certain extent a sacrifice, because for a great deal of their lives they are sacrificing for the child. That doesn't mean they're murdering their child,
No.
nor does it mean they're murdering themselves.
Right.
Okay, that's the key. But there is real sacrifice there. It's when this idea of sacrifice becomes coupled with the notion of, okay, in order to do all this, we're going to kill the baby,
Right.
or we're going to kill ourselves to save the baby,
Yeah.
on and on it goes. It's the confusion of the two ideas that I think really begins to operate, and what we see happening so many times, not only in the Vedic culture, we see it in Egypt, we see it with the Greeks, we see it with the Romans, we see it with
Carthage.
the Aztecs. Yeah, Carthage,
Mm-hmm.
the Old Testament Hebrews, we see it over and over and over and over. And the bottom line is none of this is really the original idea to begin with.
Right.
That.
And you talk about this, I think, in Grid of the Gods.
Yes, I do. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do. Yeah, yeah. It's the idea that okay, we're going, and there is a diabolic logic to it. We are going to and we see it playing out now. We're going to commit such acts of heinous barbarity that people are literally shocked into passivity. And that's usually the goal of the exercise, to make you passive.
Mm.
unfortunately, Bibi Netanyahu is not the kind of person to sit on his butt and be passive, as we're seeing right now.
Well,
Uh,
all of this, what we're talking about now, brings to mind a couple of things. The asteroid belt, as people have said that's the remains of a destroyed world, for example. I think of Star Wars, the original film,
yes,
when Alderaan. Well,
Alderaan is the
I
word.
think of Alderaan is exploded, and I think of Obi-Wan saying he feels the souls of a million souls screaming out.
Yes,
Um, you could almost look at when Tarkin destroys Alderaan with the Death Star, that
yes,
they're doing what we're talking about. The
exactly.
sacrifice of those millions of people on Alderaan is a magical act, so to
Yes,
speak.
exactly. Yes, it is.
And I wonder if that's what happened to that planet that is now the asteroid belt. If that was an intentional,
Magical act.
diabolic sacrifice, magical act on a cosmic scale.
Could be. It could be. It
Mm.
absolutely could be. Because in a certain sense, if everything that we know, Walter, about those ancient texts describing that cosmic war is true, then look what happened. That one act left and imprinted a huge scar
Mm-hmm.
on all human cultures.
Yeah, the psyche just
The
right
psyche
there.
just, can't absorb an evil so monstrously large that it would do such a thing. But
Maybe
at the same
that's. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
at the same time, the mere act of doing that on such a scale has basically made the similar act at smaller scales more possible.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, that act is a kind of initiation into a culture a culture of corruption and evil and murder. So it was at the very minimum an initiatory act. Once Stalin's old adage, the death of one or two people is a terrible tragedy. The death of a million or so is a statistic.
Yeah.
So you insulate yourself from normal human feeling. This is always the way it is.
Yeah. I wonder if we're talking about what our super secret agencies could have learned about the forgotten, the ancient past through
Mm-hmm.
recordings in granite crystals, what have you. Okay, that's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if something the NSA got in that regard, maybe a some type of recorded report,
Right.
left behind
A
ages
log.
ago by
Yeah.
a log that the civilization who did this, who destroyed that planet, or the civilization that witnessed it. I wonder if that's what was briefed, for instance, to President Carter, that,
Could be.
as the lore goes, upset him so much that they presented to him this. This is a recording we picked up from one of the pyramids, literally, with this technology, and
Mm-hmm.
listen to it or read it. And, it was just a complete shock that, oh my God, this was recorded 100,000 years ago or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
This is a real thing. And oh
Mm-hmm.
my God, what's in it? You
Mm-hmm.
know, it just, all of this discussion for me puts a new spin on what it is we might actually be doing with our space-based technology and our research
Well,
out
I
there.
think you're onto something there with that idea, with that hypothesis. I like the hypothesis because it explains, it rationalizes in a very different way some of the problems that you and I have talked about, and you and other people have talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other person I'm thinking of, in addition to President Carter,
Mm-hmm.
and his response was Trump, when Judge Napolitano asked him why he,
Mm.
Trump, did not declassify all of the Kennedy stuff. And Trump's
Right.
response was, because I can't, you would not believe what's in there. So it's almost as if there's something that is so off the charts, wild and weird.
And Kennedy was the president who was in a very material way the first one that was really pushing for us out into space and
Yes.
into this technology.
Yes.
So it goes back to the whole argument of what was he actually going to reveal that somebody
Well, this,
under no circumstances.
you have to wonder what, Kennedy's overtures to the Soviet Union to have a joint moon mission. There I think was, I honestly think, Walter, that at some point he managed to get something to Khrushchev,
Mm-hmm.
and that it turned Mr. Khrushchev around
Mm-hmm.
to the point where he was willing to seriously consider a joint moon mission with this country. Now, for someone like Nikita Khrushchev to be thinking along those lines when he was diametrically, just not in that camp at all prior to this, there had to have been some information that upset him, quite literally.
Yeah.
And Kennedy, the other thing here, Walter, that since we're talking about Mr. Trump and Mr. Kennedy, I honestly think, and I just wrote a blog today on my website about this idea, I honestly think that this business of the Biden misadministration denying Secret Service coverage and protection to Bobby Kennedy Jr. is of a piece with all of their attempts to get Trump on indictments. I think the same people are behind both efforts, and for the same reason. In other words, these two things are tied together in some very, very deep way. You've got two outsiders. They're independently wealthy. Their families have known each other for years. And then you've got the strange connections on the fringes. Trump with Roy Cohn and McCarthy.
Trump's uncle,
McCarthy being a friend of the Kennedy family, and Bobby Kennedy Sr. being on McCarthy's staff. What the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
And I think probably it's got something to do, ultimately, dig and scratch around long enough. I think it has something ultimately to do with space. And whatever it was that President Kennedy may have shared with Nikita Khrushchev, there is a much bigger picture going on here, and it has somebody in the deep state scared to death.
Yeah,
that's all I can think of.
Well, I agree with you. I think it ultimately does lead to space. Yep. It also leads to the truth of the ancient history of this world.
Yep.
And who we are, and where various inputs into our DNA that we have today, where those various inputs came from.
Yep.
And yeah, it all comes down to who we are in the cosmos, what we are in the cosmos, and to whoever else might be out there. And we are understanding this greater in a greater way, I think, through what we're learning through either this idea of ancient knowledge or knowledge being recorded literally in ancient times that we're just now, when I say now, I mean, say in the last 150 years, able to decode, able to literally turn on and play, so to speak. Yes, I do think that this has gone beyond just code. It's gone beyond just mathematical language. I do think that now They are literally able, with some of this technology we're talking about, to aim it at one of these ancient pyramids or another object and actually hear a recorded voice.
It's possible, and one of the things that I think would be the area to look at is in the Giza Death Star Revisited. I again talk about the importance of crystals and the idea that crystals are grown in response to the gravitational and electromagnetic environment that they're surrounded by, so that a quartz crystal, for example, grown on Earth and one grown in the near zero gravity of space are going to have very different types of lattice defects. So that with a sufficiently advanced science, you could literally read the lattice defects in a specific crystal and comprehend the environment that it was grown in. So that it becomes a kind of a recorder. So press that further, and you get the idea that, okay, it's recording very, very subtle stuff.
Yeah.
At a subatomic level. And at that level, if you've got a technology and a science sufficiently advanced, you might exactly be able to do what you're talking about. Read it, listen to it.
See it. Go back. Folks, if you haven't seen it, I saw it in the theater 3 times when it came out because at the time it was amazing. Go back and watch the 1978 Superman film with Christopher Reeve, the first one. And in there, he's able not only to have recordings from his home planet on the crystals, he's able to interact with them.
Yes.
Because the technology is such from Krypton that these recordings, he's able, you'll see. And that's a dramatic example of what we're talking about here right now. But check it out, this 1978 Superman.
And what's Krypton? It's an exploded planet.
Oh, yes, that's right. Oh,
that's right.
This stuff trickles down into
the
psyche and the arts, right? That's why, folks, this is why I'm telling you, don't ignore when people like me write fiction. People like Joseph write fiction. There's stuff in here that, in my opinion, is
you
real.
might be interested to know I'm writing this little fiction novel that I've told you about before that I might have you look at.
Okay.
Publish. I'm not done with it yet, but by the way, it does involve crystals.
So that should be interesting. Well, hey, do you have some time to take questions from the live chat?
Yeah, sure.
All righty. So I'm going to jump over to the live chat. Remember, folks, those of you who've been around, remind everybody who's maybe new, please put your comments and questions in all caps if you want me to see them and address them. Otherwise, I'm going to assume, if it's not in all caps, that you're having a side conversation of your own. And anyway, all caps, please. Brian Evans. Yes, Brian Evans, you're right. Like a crystal memory card.
Yeah.
And Brian Evans says, and Stargate spaceships use crystals. Okay.
The data crystals in Star Trek, on and on it goes.
Yeah, all of that. So if you have any questions for our guest, Joseph Farrell, on this topic, please, what we've been talking about today, throw them out there in the live chat. It usually takes a couple of seconds for it to show up, where we can see it. I'm going to go back and take another look at what Morley and them were. I'm intrigued now.
Since you're talking about crystal recording devices, another twist on this old theme is, why do so many large gemstones seem to have curses attached to them?
Oh, good point.
The Hope Diamond,
Yeah.
Things like this. It's another aspect of this. Maybe there is some sort of evil intention that's attached to them. I don't know,
That's intriguing in itself. That's really intriguing. Carla Struble asks, does the sun resonate at C, the chord C?
Oh, you mean the
C
chord
chord. Yeah.
CHORD.
Yeah.
Now I don't know what the resonant frequency of the sun is. A C major triad is actually 3 different notes.
Mm-hmm.
So the chord itself has 3 different frequencies that it will be resonant to. But the fundamental frequency, the note C itself, that gives rise to the other 2 overtones in the chord, is what I think you'd have to pay attention to. And in all honesty, Carl, I don't know what the resonant frequency of the sun is. I just don't. I can tell you that whatever the frequency is, it will have a 5th and a 3rd harmonic overtone. In other words, it will produce a triad. It will produce a musical chord.
You're just referring to 5th, 3rd musically.
Yeah.
My mind goes to, and think of Babylon's banksters. My mind goes to Ohio has the 5th, 3rd bank.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again,
Anyway.
the bankers have known ever since President Hoover and Edward Dewey and the foundation of the study of cycles. The bankers have known all about this stuff. That's why Mitsubishi Bank has representatives on the board of the foundation of cycles. Absolutely.
Okay. Let me go to the next. My tech guru was adjusting something.
Yes,
here.
I saw your tech guru over there. I need a tech guru.
Alcyon Bell asks, how would the demon in the Eker apply to this discussion?
Oh, the Acre. Acre is spelled
Yeah.
is spelled EKUR. The demon in the Acre, again, if the plasma life hypothesis is true, it applies to virtually every aspect of it. My question for you, Alson, is what is the demonstrative pronoun this in reference to? I don't know what the this is. I don't have an antecedent to it unless you mean the entire discussion. If it's the entire discussion, then yeah, the idea of plasma life being a part of this means that plasma's biophysics has something to do with phase conjugation and therefore with harmonics and therefore with quantum entanglement and on and on and on we could go. Yeah, absolutely. We ourselves are we have 2 bodies, quite literally. We have this physical, sack of water that we think we live inside of. And then we have surrounding us, we have quite literally what is a bioplasma dust cloud. And by the way, it extends out to about 6 feet from your water sack. Okay. So there is literally another body of you that consists of all your deritus, all your little dusty things that constantly follow you around. And it's unique to you. So it's a little bioplasma cloud that you're inside of.
That's interesting. Real interesting.
That's very interesting. Yep.
D. Dorothy Papineau comments, prayer beads are used because they absorb the prayers. There's some intention technology for you.
Yeah.
Let's see.
They're used to focus intention.
Let's see. D-Light asks, is the Great Pyramid reparable?
If you mean, can it be restored to its original function? No, because if you read at least Chris Dunn's or Zechariah Sitchin's or my presentation of the various versions of the machine hypothesis, and the weapon hypothesis is a subset of machine hypothesis. What the name says? Excuse me. We just had a shadow, walk up to my door.
Uh-oh, the shadow men.
Oh, it's the UPS guy bringing it.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
I'm sorry.
Uh, yeah.
Um, if you look at those three versions of the machine hypothesis, all three of us maintain that there are components of the structure that are missing, and it's a fairly reasonable conclusion once you understand certain aspects of the Great Pyramid to come to that conclusion. There are things missing from it, not the least of which, of course, is the capstone on it, not the least of which are the missing casing stones on the Great Pyramid. So we know that there are components of the structure that are no longer there. So
And something that was obviously inside the Grand Gallery.
And obviously inside the Grand Gallery, right. So unless you can find those things or make exact copies of what they may have been, no, it will never be restored to its function.
Yeah. Johnny Side asks, if they get a message, we talked about this earlier, but if they get a message from the pyramids, how could we understand them because they aren't in English, or are they? I would say they're not in English, but we answered that earlier when we talked about how a linguistic would, and a code reading linguist would analyze that. Oswald Spengler, has Joseph come across the work of Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould regarding the mystical imperialism of Afghanistan, Fitzgerald dynasty legacy related to the JFK assassination?
Never. No. I whatever that is, it's entirely new to me. I've never heard of any connection like that.
Okay, that's interesting, Oswald. Thanks for...
Especially for coming from someone with a username like Oswald Spengler.
Brian Evans, is there any way the monks had a hidden knowledge of mines and tunnels? Sure.
Oh, you betcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most of the sites in Europe, that you're thinking of in connection with monasteries have tunnel systems, and it's fairly well known. It's an almost universal phenomenon at megalithic sites as well. Absolutely.
Think of the pipes in an organ, right?
Yeah, think of the pipes on an organ. Yeah, think all those strange embedded cisterns in Latin America or Ireland. They're all over the place.
Yeah, like the round towers. Gypsy Moon asks, crystals in the ground of the pyramids as recording devices? More actually, the medium, Gypsy Moon. The crystals would be the medium onto which the record would be recorded.
One of the interesting things, Gypsy Moon, is that in the Grand Gallery of the Great Pyramid, Chris Dunn argued that there were banks of Helmholtz resonators that were inserted in the slots along the ramp inside the Grand Gallery. Zechariah Sitchin, in his reconstruction of the texts that he was looking at in connection with the Great Pyramid, believed that those things in the Grand Gallery were crystals. I kind of combined both hypotheses because Dunn is correct in that the Grand Gallery is obviously an acoustic chamber. And to me, I can look at it and tell you it has characteristics in common with what's called a stopped pipe on a pipe organ. Okay. It has very similar features to that. So I think it's possible that you're dealing with resonators that were intended to be both optically and acoustically resonant at one and the same time, and therefore crystals. Could they have been therefore used as recording devices? Yeah, possibly.
Pepe Le Pew Pew asks, any idea on the crystal city being the mental structure of the mature human brain? That's an interesting concept.
I don't know what the Crystal City is that you're referring to, so I'm going to
Is
go
it?
with Walter. I'll say that's an interesting
Yeah,
comment.
is it Crystal City in Washington D.C. or is it Crystal City in Superman's Fortress of Solitude? I don't know. Here we go. M Matthews, I guess, is asking if the jewel from the Lucifer crown, from Lucifer's crown, may actually have been uh, uh, a recording. Could have,
Oh, um, possibly. However, the question I have is the problem I would have is that there's not just one jewel on Lucifer's crown. If you're following the Old Testament
maybe it's the
presentation,
one that fell out. Is what they're
well,
referring to.
there are 9 crystals in Lucifer's crown.
Yes.
And when you compare those crystals to the 12 crystals of the 12 tribes of Israel on the high priest's ephod,
Mm-hmm.
Lucifer is missing the entire third row.
Oh, that's right. I've
Yeah.
heard you talk about this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Johann Wolf asked, "Do you believe the Holy Grail of information is regarding the threshold between material and spirit realms and how to navigate it?"
If I'm understanding the question correctly, the thing that everybody's after is information regarding that point of surface contact between matter and the incorporeal world. By the way, that's us.
The common surface.
That's what we humans are. The common surface. That's what
Yeah.
we are.
Um,
I would say that there is some sort of cosmological secret that we embody and embed. It can never, ever be decoded or captured through mere science or mathematics or physics because it is of a theological and spiritual nature.
Okay.
But once having said that, would knowing such things give a certain amount of ability to influence either realm? Yes, it would. But in order to do that, you'd have to overcome the great rift between the two. And that rift is quite literally death.
There you go.
So I would caution any and all New Age Gnostic nuts out there. Do not dabble in this stuff because it is all too easy to be captured by things that can only get fixed by an exorcist. And trust me, you don't want to go there. Don't.
True.
Yeah, no, don't want to do that.
The previous question and talking about the crystals information, what came to my mind was I wonder if there. Let's be literal about the Emerald Tablet. I wonder what could have been recorded on that beyond the shopping list. That you have
the shopping list
that you've talked about.
Yeah, well, I do think that there are. The interesting thing, Walter, about esoteric lore is that so much of it does have to deal with crystals.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just the Emerald Tablet, the Sapphire Ring of Solomon, the Foundation Stone of the Earth, on and on it goes. I do think, and I'm going to sound like the New Age Gnostic nuts I've just denounced. But
it happens to all of us.
It happens to all of us. So anyway, I do think that behind these tales of crystals There has to be a reality. I do think these things exist, including the foundation stone of the earth. I think there's some sort of literal seed of truth to all of them, and that includes the Emerald Tablet of Tehuta. Um, I'm going to speculate now and say, I suspect that all of these independent little bits of lore might actually be fragments of one tradition concerning
Sure.
one object or at least one class of objects. That's been my suspicion all along.
Here is Oswald Spengler letting us know that we can find out about Fitzgerald and Gould through Trine Day Publishing
Okay.
and video interviews. So there's
Okay.
that. Let me scroll down here. There's multiple comments about what the Vatican knows and is hiding about all of this that we've been talking about.
Well, it's easy to pick on the Vatican. Um, I what I suspect is that if there's anybody at the Vatican that knows things that they're not keeping, it's you have to look deeper than just saying the Vatican. I think you have to look at the cardinal archivists of the Vatican archives. And in particular, you have to look very carefully at particular cardinals that have been the archivists of the Vatican. I can think of one in particular that sends my suspicion needle into the red zone. Okay, he was a French cardinal by the name of Eugène Cardinal Tisserand. Really interesting dude. That's all I'll say.
Nick N asks, have you run across mention of liquid crystal matrices applications or only solids?
It depends on what you mean by run across, Nick. If you're saying run across in terms of esoteric lore, no. Most of that lore gives you the impression that they are talking about solid, rock crystals. Some of the speculation, some of the things that are said in those little bits of lore or ancient text about crystals strongly suggest to me that the only way that you could make a crystal like that work would be in a liquid crystal form. So the times that I'm talking about liquid crystals in conjunction with some of these things, it's because it's the only way I can rationalize something like what they're describing working. I hope that answers adequately what you're asking.
Pepe Le Pew Pew clarifies he was referring to the Crystal City being the New Jerusalem in connection with Spirit, 3 in 1 or X in 1. Remember the whole thing about the Crystal City being kind of an analogy to the human brain.
Yeah.
Mind.
Pepe, you're going to have to spell out your analogy. Give me more details of what you're thinking and asking the question. I simply don't know enough about what you're trying to get at.
Carla Struble asks, what do you think was in the Ark of the Covenant? Was it uranium or something?
We're told what was in it. If you look carefully in the Bible, what was placed in the Ark of the Covenant was precisely the tablets of the covenant. Now, interestingly enough, when the tradition is that when Moses comes down the mountain initially with the tablets of the covenant, that those tablets were inscribed on, here it comes, folks, sapphire. So, in other words, the same stone was used to carve the covenants as in Hebrew tradition was the foundation stone of the universe and the stone on Solomon's ring. It's sekhtia, the Hebrew word for a sapphire. Now, I find that incredibly interesting because sapphire is nothing but corundum, aluminum oxide. Okay. So in other words, it's the very same type of alloy, crystal alloy, as a ruby. Rubies are also corundum. The difference in color in a sapphire and a ruby's red color comes from the presence of chromium. A sapphire is different color. Sapphires come in all sorts of colors, but we usually associate blue with sapphire. And that depends, the color of a sapphire depends on the trace elements found in the sapphire during its formation. Rubies and sapphires are the second hardest objects on the Mohs scale after diamond. So you're dealing with incredibly hard crystals. They're harder than quartz. Okay.
But the fact that they put an object of sapphire inside the ark, which,
but remember the original tablets of Moses he destroyed, and then the recarved tablets are what's in the ark.
Are they granite?
Probably. I would think some sort of crystal bearing
could, and that would contribute to the ark having been a communication device, possibly. A radio to God, as Belloc says in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
It's a you look at the Ark of the Covenant and the descriptions of how it's constructed, and you're dealing with a cavity, and you're dealing with, pardon me, you're dealing with, thank you. You're dealing with something, Carla, that was constructed in layers. Please note now, layers of dielectric material and metal. Dielectric and metal. So in other words, it's both linear and nonlinear material layered in its construction. So that means it's a capacitor, and it will build up an enormous static voltage charge, which is why you have them carrying it around on poles and not touching the dang thing.
Yeah.
Because build up enough charge in it, and you touch it, and you ground it, and you're dead.
And in the spirit of what we talk about here in this, I call it a series now, our trans-temporal cosmic discussion, now we can think of, I never thought about this before, maybe one can look across time and space by peering into the Ark of the Covenant itself, or what appears between the cherubim on top. It could be a trans-temporal device. I'm just saying.
Well, it's interesting in terms of the trans-temporal device to remember that there is one cherub that covereth that's missing. There's only two. There's supposed to be three. Why is the third one missing? Well, the third one was Lucifer.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Okay. Yeah, there's all this stuff that interconnects here, folks.
Okay.
Yeah, there's all sorts of interconnecting stuff.
Johann Wolf, referring to what you said, how we are that thing between the incorporeal and the material, says it's not death because astral travel is real. No, Johann, I think what he's saying is the process of death. What happens in death is this encoded thing. Of course, we are not physical beings, so yeah, there's what you're going to call astral travel. But what you think of astral travel, correct me if I'm wrong here, Joseph, or maybe you see it in a different perspective. What we're calling astral travel may not be what we in the popular, spiritual New Age community thinks it is.
I am going to say that no. If you're playing around with projecting yourself outside your body, I would again caution you not to do such practices. Is it possible to do that? Yes. But I'm coming from a very old tradition, an old Christian tradition that warns constantly against practicing such things. Because the ultimate result can be that you will lose yourself. What you are literally doing is you are playing around with the phenomenon of death itself. Death is the separation of the soul and the body. And you can, by projecting it, make it impossible to come back to and allow your body to be filled by something else. And trust me, you don't want to go there. So again, consider yourself warned in no uncertain terms.
Because on the theme of the show, you never know what's out there wanting to communicate with you.
Bingo.
This is
Bingo.
why when you have a psychic telling you that so-and-so has contacted them, they don't know that that's so-and-so.
Yes, that's my problem there, right? Yes.
And
Ding,
so
ding, ding.
don't get excited when
Yeah.
one of these people come along and tell you that your loved one or your friend who's gone or your beloved doggy is there.
Right.
Because it may not be. Not that the psychic's lying. The psychic might actually be thinking that what
Right.
they're communicating with is your beloved doggy and your loved one. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that's who and what it is.
Yeah, the problem that we're having with all of this is that people think that these things aren't real or are not possible. They are very real.
Sure.
And they're very possible.
Yeah.
The problem is it's too easy to be deceived in these things because in a certain sense we've lost the natural connection to these things. Right. These things, the way I view them, Walter, you're probably thinking along the same lines. I view all of these things, remote viewing, astral projection, and so on. These are all inherently natural faculties and properties and abilities of human nature.
I agree. All of us.
They are part of all of us. There. Yes, absolutely. The problem is we've lost the ability to discern their proper and true place.
That's right.
And that, I think, my friends, only comes through some spiritual discipline. And I'm not going to assume that I have that expertise. And I think few people in the modern world do, particularly those in our Western culture who have cut themselves off deliberately by rejection of the Christian Catholic tradition. And by Catholic, I don't mean papal.
Right.
Please understand that. I can pull off articles from the Philokalia, an old set of monastic writings in the Orthodox Church, and show you that they will tell you that all of these things are perfectly natural, but you don't seek them and you don't do them.
And folks, whether you personally subscribe to a particular religion or not, what we're saying is these things, these phenomena, this stuff is real.
Yeah.
Okay. The different theological philosophies, the different theological analyses have their description of these things.
Absolutely, they do.
Yeah,
you don't have descriptions of this. You can find descriptions of this in the Vedas and so on and so forth. What I'm urging people is to quit thinking that everything but Christianity has anything to say about these things. That's the one religion that you're ignoring in this modern world, and that's the one religion that might help you deal with some of the things that are happening. The other ones are telling you, go out and do all of this stuff. Have your strange yoga, do your strange exercises, follow your Buddhist monks, and have tulpas and so on. And then you wonder why you're getting poltergeists and everything else in your lives. There's one tradition telling you, don't do this stuff. Yes, it is natural to you, but you don't seek to do it. If it happens to you, that's a different matter. But you don't go out and seek it.
I'm going to have to do a show on the activity that really happened a lot during my Empire of the Wheel investigation.
Oh boy, you've told me about some of that,
and all I was doing what any investigator or journalist would do. I wasn't out there doing magic or anything. I was just looking at records and digging around and going to places, and there was all manner of poltergeist and other people were witnessing this. This wasn't just me. I'll have to do a show on that. Definitely.
Listen, Walter, do you remember the the demon in the acre book, I have that long quotation in it
Mm-hmm.
from
Mm-hmm.
St. John of Damascus.
Okay.
Well, there's an interesting little thing that he says in there that kind of encapsulates the attitude I'm trying to convey to people. Now, whether people believe me or not, and whether or not Johann Wolf wants to go on continuing to practice those things, that's up to you. I'm just doing my due diligence and duty to tell people beware. Whether
Yeah.
they listen to me or not is up to them.
Oh, I'm
But
with you there. I always warn people.
yeah, always, always. But St. John says in that passage that these things, meaning the bodiless powers of heaven, the angels and the demons, he says very explicitly, these things cannot be contained by seals. What's he talking about? He's talking precisely about all of those pentagrams and other seals that a ceremonial magician draws on the floor with their blue chalk and thinks that that is going to keep that entity inside that little circle. No way. He's saying, ain't going to happen like that.
No.
So, I that's all I'm saying, folks. Just please don't play with this stuff. Just don't. Don't.
Very,
Be
very
very
wary,
careful.
very careful.
Yeah.
And well, hey, Joseph, we're at the 2-hour mark. I want to thank you for
Thank you.
taking the time to be here. Another great conversation, which
Well, I hope
it led
so.
us down some enlightening avenues there, and I look forward to having you on again. So
All right. Thank you.
let's make this happen. Thanks again.
Yeah, my pooch is saying, take me outside now. Okay.
Okay, Shiloh. See you later.
All right.
All righty, Joseph. Thanks again. Okay, folks. Well, again, I want to thank Joseph. I want to thank all of you in the live chat. Excellent questions. We had a pretty good size number of viewers today, as we always get when Dr. Farrell is here. And again, I want to reiterate, you don't have to subscribe to any particular religion to understand that what we're saying is these things, these phenomena, these entities, we believe them to be real. I know what I've encountered. I believe it's real. I'm convinced. And whatever tradition you subscribe to, just keep that in mind, because you never know what's trying to communicate with you. Okay. On the one hand, it could be harmless. We come in peace. On the other hand, it could be Captain Howdy coming at you through the Ouija board. You just don't know, and just keep it in mind and be careful. So that's it for today's live stream, and I will see you again on Friday with Malia Grimm. She'll be back, and we have a special activity going on this weekend. Speaking of the things that I just warned you about, we're going to the Palomar Inn this weekend on a haunted ghost tour. And we will keep in mind to be very careful what we do this weekend. But we'll be live Friday night, probably from a hotel?
No, from here.
From here. We'll be live from here. And we haven't decided what we're going to talk about yet. And you'll find out when we appear Friday night. So thank you all, and we'll see you in a couple of days.